All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. We did a very recent upload on the case of Casey Anthony and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of her daughter, Caylee Anthony, back in 2008, and of course the trial that happened in 2011. But I guess the biggest motivation for this is just some unfinished thoughts and feelings about it because much like the case of O.J. Simpson, and I've done countless parallels between Casey Anthony and O.J. Simpson just in conversations in my daily life because you just can't get away from it. There's something about these cases that pulls you in, and it just you never feel kind of satisfied with the situation. It's like you always know that there's something there that you should be trying to find out, and that's something that people are withholding, and that kind of just keeps you to ask more questions and to kind of challenge the narratives. In the previous upload, we were mostly talking about everything associated with Casey Anthony and Caylee Anthony prior to the trial, and a few things about Jose Baez were thrown in there, but that was mostly everything that was going up to the trial. In this upload, if we kind of want to talk about some things that are going on post trial with Casey Anthony over the last, I guess it's been 11 years now. It's 2019 at the time of this recording. The last 11 years since the death of Caylee Marie Anthony back in 2008. What do we make of the situation? Well, some of the things that I would say is Casey Anthony, if we're going to talk about psychological profiling, she definitely seems guilty. I mean, it's like if you want, I know that psychological profiling is not like 100% state of the art, 100% scientific. But if you just listen to sort of her responses, all about like, I sleep well at night, now that, when she's talking about the death of her daughter and that's her response, a lot of people are just like, that's so creepy. It's like your kid died at 2 years old. I mean, and you're just saying that you sleep well at night. You're sort of just not showing a whole lot of remorse for the situation, not showing a whole lot of grief for the situation. However, it has been several years, and I do confess though that when they showed the video of Casey Anthony, when they discovered Kaylee's remains, she did break down in tears, but there could be some motivations for that. The other things that really kind of point toward suspicious activity associated with Casey Anthony in the years following the trial is just that the refusal to talk about what happened. Like when they're asking about how did Caylee die, and she's just saying, I don't know. I mean, that's stuff that children and teenagers would do when they're just like, I mean, if there's a broken window or something, did you break that window? I don't know what happened. It's like, I mean, like, that's just kind of how children and teenagers dodge the situation, passive resistance. And I mean, I was a teenager once. I told a few lies to get out of trouble, but I never murdered anyone. Definitely not doing anything of this level. So it seems like there's a lot of immaturity also associated with Casey Anthony. Immaturity, passive resistance. I mean, someone in the comments section described her as a sociopath. We've done a few kind of uploads on that, about the differences between psychopaths, sociopaths, and narcissists. I'm not 100% sure if she's at that level yet, but it's definitely some kind of disturbing behavior and definitely not showing remorse for the situation. I think the refusal to kind of provide solid explanations about what happened to Caylee Anthony is also a giant red flag. And also, while I was watching, another upload, they did mention something that we were discussing in the past uploads that I had been reading about, where that Casey Anthony, of course, very famously said that Caylee was with the nanny, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, for the time when she was missing, and then she came out later saying that that was a fabrication, it was a fictitious story, but she referred to Zenaida as Zanny the nanny, and that's kind of triggered a lot of people to think that she was giving her daughter Xanax so she could fall asleep, and then she wouldn't have to make arrangements for a babysitter. She wouldn't have to do, well, anything at all. She could just go out and live a single person's life. It was something that she did, and perhaps Caylee had some sort of terrible reaction to the Xanax, and that caused her death. And then Casey had to stage the scene. Also, though, the judge from the trial suggested he believed that it was actually the chloroform, which was my initial theory about what happened to Caylee, that Casey was using chloroform to knock her out. And while I was searching through videos, I even found the one again about the inmate, her old cellmate in prison, who said that Casey had confessed to her that she had been using chloroform to knock Kaylee out so that she could go out partying or just go out and see her boyfriend using things of that nature. So it really seems like there's kind of a lot of pressure going at that very particular angle. Some way, somehow, Kaylee was given some sort of drugs to be kind of knocked out, and that it led to her death. I mean, a lot of things are putting pressure on that very specific point. But when we want to kind of examine the situation, I mean, how much do we make of Casey Anthony's Google searches for neck breaking and for things about chloroform? That was one of them. Homemade weapons. I mean, does that really indicate something that's associated with premeditated murder? If she did overdose her daughter on Xanax or give her the chloroform to knock her out, was was she intentionally trying to kill her? I mean, if you combine some of those Google searches like with the theory that we just explained, it sounds like that those would kind of work in conjunction together where it would really look like some sort of premeditated murder. Other than that, though, it's like my kind of gut instinct is no, that this was not a deliberate homicide, even with all of those things, Googling neck breaking and such. For starters, Kaylee's neck wasn't broken. We mentioned that in the first upload. My gut instinct is just telling me that this was sort of like some sort of accidental death. But if you, even still though, even if you she would still be charged with murder. I mean, sure, like if you give your kid drugs and those drugs caused the death, I mean, murder has to be about intent, right? Well, she intentionally gave her kid some sort of drug and that killed her. I mean, that could easily turn into a murder charge. Those things are mostly about how the lawyers spin the situation. Not, I mean, no kidding, right? I was saying that's why Casey Anthony got off because of how her lawyers were able to spin the situation. I was very surprised though that a lot of people were saying that Casey Anthony was found not guilty. I was very surprised about that, and some of the questions though that I had in the past, going through some new material today, it sort of seemed like the defense was they're kind of talking about crimes that maybe did not happen because I was like in the first upload I was talking about disposing of a body. But remember, Kaylee was found in a shallow grave about 2 blocks, some walking distance from Casey Anthony's home. She's found in the shallow grave, right? And I was like, that's pretty illegal, right? I mean, neglecting your kid is pretty illegal, right? Well, the first thing to say about neglect is Casey Anthony was initially arrested on child neglect charges. I guess that just didn't happen because they charged her with murder eventually. But I mean, she definitely should have been convicted of child neglect. I said reckless endangerment in the first time, but I was thinking of child endangerment, child neglect. She should have been convicted on that and served time in jail for child neglect, for not reporting her daughter missing for 31 days. But what happened with that is that they kind of viewed that as a very extreme situation, and they tried to pass a new law in Florida called Caylee's Law, which would make it illegal for parents not to report their children missing for an extended period of time. That's a brilliant idea. I mean, someone should be held accountable. If you're someone's legal guardian and a 2-year-old is missing for 31 days, you don't say anything. Well, I mean, they should face some sort of legal repercussion because, I mean, if this had been a different situation, say for example, like this had genuinely been what Casey Anthony had talked about with Zanny the nanny. If this had genuinely been the case that her housekeeper or sorry her nanny abducted Kaylee and took her somewhere and Casey didn't know where she was, I mean Casey's responsibility would have been to call the police and find out what's happening with my daughter so something worse would not happen to her, let alone being abducted. So yes, it should be illegal not to report your children missing for an extended period of time. I don't know how many parents would let their children go missing for 31 days without saying anything. But we do have other instances of this happening, such as the disappearance of Garnell Moore from Baltimore, Maryland, which is a case maybe I'll cover on the channel one day that also involves something of this nature. But when we want to talk about what is happening with Casey Anthony, I guess I still kind of go with that theory that she was kind of giving Caylee some sort of drug or the chloroform to knock her unconscious for a period of time, and then Caylee didn't wake up. I still go with that, but I'm still somewhat bothered by it. I'm definitely most bothered by Casey Anthony's behavior post trial. I mean, of course, people are going to lay low. People are going to change their appearance. She did an interview with Piers Morgan with which was not recorded. They just talked on the phone or via webcam or something like that. All right, you don't want that stuff broadcast on national television, but you would talk to Piers Morgan to get your side of the story out. That seems totally normal. But just when they're asking the questions, well, what happened to Caylee? I don't know. It sounds so fake. It sounds just like, passive resistance. Like you're just trying to like get the person to give up asking. You're pretending like you're just blank and then you're trying to get the person to stop. And that's sort of like what Casey Anthony is. And if I can make another parallel between Casey Anthony and O.J. Simpson, it's what somebody said during the Judith Regan interview. I don't know if it was Soledad O'Brien or Judith Regan or one of the friends of Nicole Brown Simpson, but they're just like, this person is just acting like they're a giant mastermind, like they're just so cunning and manipulative. But in reality, they fool no one. And that's exactly how you would say what you would say about Casey Anthony. One area where the kind of two high profile trials differ is like, we're talking about O.J. Simpson and Casey Anthony. An area where they differ is that there are an enormous amount of alternative theories around O.J. Simpson. And we discussed many of them on this channel, whether it's like, drug connections or it's like other family members involved, Robert Kardashian being involved, you name it, it's out there. But the thing is, when we want to look at something such as Casey Anthony, I don't really see the enormous amount of things about people pleading for her innocence. I was even, searching online for some stuff, and I guess, I mean, the only alternative theory that's really getting any traction is the one put forward by the defense that Caylee Anthony died in the family pool and her grandfather, George Anthony, was the one who buried her in the trash bags in the shallow grave. And that's kind of how, like, I've always wondered why there was no charge involved with that. And one of the things that was kind of explained while I was going through stuff this afternoon was that I guess it's just like, well, George Anthony had never been implicated in that crime. No one had talked about that prior to the trial. No one had talked about that other than the defense attorneys. So the police obviously had nothing on him. I mean, the police had never arrested him. The police had never confronted him about that, about Caylee dying in the pool. So once again, the defense was talking about situations that did not really happen. So they wouldn't have be held accountable for it. They were talking about situations that were not really in reality. I mean, and I repeat, when I say not in reality, George Anthony had never been charged with the improper disposal of a body, with the illegal disposal of human remains. So that's why they brought it up. And the police never implicated him in this crime later on. That should give you some heads up that that story probably was not true. Once again, if the police thought that they had some merit to arrest him, if they thought that that story had any credibility at all, why not make the arrest of George Anthony, of the grandfather, for the illegal disposal of human remains, for the improper disposal of a human body? Because that's also illegal. I mean, if they actually think he did that, which it doesn't seem they do, they could have arrested him and he could have gone on trial. He could have been tried for the murder. Why wasn't he tried for the murder or any of these things they accused him of? Most likely it was just some things that were spun up by Jose Baez and his team. I mean, that's what their job is. And that's what we were talking about as well in the first upload, that line from Alan Dershowitz. I mean, that's just the role of the defense attorney. And like someone once got years ago, they're like, a lawyer's job is to win. It's like it's not about your conscience, it's not about your gut feeling. The lawyer's job is to win. And that's kind of the I guess that's sort of one of the plot lines of the movie Cape Fear, the kind of background story, the backstory of the movie Cape Fear. Like, so you can kind of see how those things would blow out of control. Well, now, what do we really make of the situation in 2019 looking back? Was there a miscarriage of justice? In the previous upload, we said that some people say that no, there wasn't any miscarriage of justice. No, like they're like if you don't have a cause of death, you don't have a murder. And that's really just a very, very disheartening thing to hear. I mean, it's like it really just sort of sounds like going to all these lengths to, burying a 2-year-old girl in the ground with duct tape, nonetheless. I mean, like, were they trying to duct tape the trash bag shut so she couldn't get out or something? She was dead. That duct tape thing really bothers me. And that, like, thing about finding the duct tape at the crime scene almost pushes it beyond reasonable doubt for me. Or, I mean, like, I would say that for years I thought that it did push it beyond reasonable doubt. Because I had always thought, like the duct tape was covering her mouth, and I was like, you don't put duct tape over someone's mouth if you think they're already dead, now do you? But that's just kind of what most likely happened, and still, though, it's like the entire, just the entire scenario associated with what they've described, with what the defense has described, it sounds like they have, I don't know, just for me, it sounds like the reasonable doubt. And if I had been on the jury, it seems like that I would say guilty as opposed to not guilty. I think that they got way too hung up on the cause of death and just like the circumstances or the manner in which Caylee was disposed does not appear to be indicative of an accidental death and a cover up. It really seems like it appears to be, well, someone intentionally did something illegal and then someone buried Caylee for to not get implicated in something more illegal. Once again, if she gave her Xanax or something and Caylee overdosed and died, she probably would have been charged for murder for that because, I mean, you drug your kid and that leads to death. You intentionally gave them the drugs, and then they just had a terrible reaction to that, so that would be murder, manslaughter. Once again, it depends on how they set that stuff up at a trial. But Casey Anthony, they have similar names. I'm mix them up while I'm talking, like on the podcast like this, but Casey Anthony has really not done herself any favors in the post trial interviews, in sort of her new life as a photographer, working as some sort of private investigator, this, that, and the other, whatever title she wants to go by. In the post trial years, her sort of nonchalance about the situations, yeah, whatever, I sleep well at night, I don't really care that my daughter died 8 years ago. Meh, I'm over it. I mean, that's just exactly what it is. It's just like meh, and it's like she doesn't seem too heartbroken now. She seems more infatuated with herself. And that's where a lot of it kind of, that's how this kind of bad situation really got out of control. And a lot of people were just like, she should have put her daughter up for adoption and she should not have been involved in the kid's life at all because look what happened. And I know that sounds very judgmental and it's like after the fact and you can't change those things. But when you want to bring these things to question, it's just someone who had just such a huge problem with habitual lying. The whole Zanny the Nanny story. She was convicted on 4 counts of perjury, mind you, for lying to the police officers about a variety of subjects. Not to mention, and like, she created a whole fictional story about working at Universal Studios. She even brought her family there, gave them a tour of the building, and then halfway through, she's like, I'm sorry, I don't actually work here. Habitual lying, out of control. I mean, like the lies were out of control, is what I mean. That's the stuff that's out of control, unstable, work life, not really having too strong of a means of taking a care of a child on her own without the assistance of her parents or her ex-fiance. So it's like she brought a kid into the world in a very unfortunate situation. And that was problematic enough. Problematic enough. But some people are able to rebound from all of those destructive issues. Some people are able to get beyond that. I mean, if you're listening to this, you probably had some issues with your parents growing up. I had issues with my parents growing up, but we were able to survive that. Our parents were able to overcome some level of difficulty, and we were able to push through certain things. The problem is, Caylee couldn't do anything about it because she was 2 years old. So that led us to an even more destructive outcome, which was Caylee passing away. I mean, the neglect charges should have carried through to the trial. I mean, why not charge her with neglect at the trial and have her do more jail time? She should have served more jail time for that. And once again, there might be some sort of interpretation that I'm overlooking because I'm fully aware that I'm not the absolute best expert on this, and I'm definitely not a lawyer. But it's like, as a human being, who like, and with eyes and ears, it's like it seems like she should have been charged with a more serious version of child neglect and should have served more jail time. And it's most likely, or like, I mean, I can even tell you, her actions led to the death of Caylee Anthony. And if there had been some totally plausible explanation about how Caylee had died, she could have come forward in the post trial interviews and explained her side of the story. But instead, how did Caylee die? I don't know. Meh, I'm over it. And that's the kind of disgusting behavior that still has made Casey Anthony perhaps one of the most hated women in America, if not the world. Granted, a lot of people have gotten over some of the hysteria associated with the trial, but on these cases, though, we still have a lot to discuss. And again, it's like we might explore Casey Anthony a little bit more on this channel, but it's very difficult to say because this is one that has been through the process, double jeopardy. She'll never be tried again. And she's already kind of moved beyond some of this. And the situation has gone beyond what the law could really do. And I don't really know about her ever going to trial again for any of these things. So we can see what happens. I mean, we can see what happens in terms of discussing this case a little bit more and discussing some more theories. And perhaps we'll find maybe something a little bit more pertinent to the investigation that could have linked something together, maybe a plot hole in the stories that would kind of shed some light on Casey Anthony's guilt. Okay, well, that's all I really have to say about this portion of the Casey Anthony trial and the death of Caylee Marie Anthony back in 2008. If you have any questions, comments at all, just please drop a comment below. If you have anything to say at all, I would love to hear from you. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button, or you can subscribe, of course, but most importantly, please drop some comments below so we can discuss.